Hello, and welcome to the Cancer Journey podcast. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Sherry Ann.
So let's start with Pesh and do a little check-in to get grounded. I can start today.
Great.
Okay. Physically, a 4. Emotionally, a 4.1. Spiritually, a 4. And hope is a 4.5. And my word is flip.
Okay. Physically, 4.2. Emotionally, 4.25. Spirit, 4.5. Hope, 4.7. And my word is grounded.
Okay. So today we're going to just dive right on in. We're talking about what we're calling negative emotions, but really more just about emotions and some of maybe the judgments that we have around them as they come up. I mean, it's such a, we talk about emotional awareness in the world. There's a lot of that conversation around emotion. And I personally think that the conversation has shifted a little bit in the last, I don't know, like 5 years, just from being like this very like, oh, you're too emotional to now in these last few years, 5 years, people really accepting the emotions. And maybe I'm biased based on my experience with working at this company and stuff too, but I feel like it's in the conversation more. And so when it's in the larger zeitgeist conversation of emotion, it's easy to fall into, oh, it's just like, it's negative. I'm negative. It's a negative emotion and want to brush it off or even just be in avoidance of it.
Yes, and negative emotions, not really how we describe it at CJI, though I know that that's out there, and that's what everyone says. They either say negative or bad, which just already judges the emotion. Where when we're talking about emotions within our community, it's constricting would be more akin to what people classify as negative or bad, and expansive is the good or the positive. And then there's these emotions on the way from, expansive to constricting or constricting to expansive, which we call transitional. And so for us, no good or bad, no judgment on the emotion. It's more of a vibration. We all have all of them, and we're going to feel all of them. Even if we're going to suppress or repress or push away what the emotion is, we all have the capabilities of feeling all of them. And so I think it's really interesting to talk about what is classified as negative, bad, or in this context, or our context, constricting, because nobody wants to feel them. It's like, oh, it feels icky. I feel bad when I feel these emotions. And so there's this identity mix up that happens when somebody's tapping into their emotions and feeling it. And typically, as humans, we tend to kind of wallow in bad or negative more. Like if we did something bad, we feel bad about it and we beat ourselves up in our heads, over and over again. But when something good happens, we might go, yay, oh, that feels wonderful. And it's a fleeting moment. So we don't stay in that space. And
Mm-hmm.
so spending time talking about these constricting emotions is actually a service that I hope, it feels like a service that we're doing for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that while the conversation is more open about emotions now, how to be with them isn't necessarily as well known what to do with, right? Like we're only starting to recognize that we have them and let ourselves have them, but in what way, in what environments, because often in especially work environments, right, we try to almost pretend that they don't exist and kind of are in avoidance and want to remain in like staying positive, right? That whole idea of staying positive is really still prevalent, even if we're recognizing that there's toxic positivity too. So, how do we express, especially emotions that we maybe have judged to be negative or see them as more negative or just harder to be with? Like, how do we stay with them? Like, I think that it's much easier to go with the positive emotions. So, like, let's just focus on negative emotions and how to not necessarily shift, but like what to do with them, you know? It's like a
Yeah.
really big question, but
Yeah. Because, I mean, I totally get where you are because when they show up, it's generally when we're triggered. Something happens and we're triggered. And I know, um, what is it? The opposite of trigger is glimmer.
mhm,
So we all go, oh, I just got triggered. Okay, let me try to grab for a glimmer. And yet, the only way to move from a constricting, triggering negative emotion is to actually feel it and be with
mhm,
it. And so when you say, what do we do with them? It's my immediate response is be with it.
mhm,
And
yeah,
I know people are like, ew, but it's constricting and it feels tight and it's
mhm,
icky and I want to cry and then I don't want to cry because I'm embarrassed to cry or I think I'm going to cry and I'll never stop. And all of these things that we put on these constricting emotions when really, once we just feel them, whether it is, hopelessness and despair or powerlessness or uh, rage or jealousy, it's like, okay, but you can choose to feel it for a moment or an episode and really let
mhm,
yourself feel that and it will naturally shift. Or you can fight it, fight it, fight it. And let me tell you, it's going to stay here longer than
mhm,
you want. And so it's like I'm fighting something or I'm holding it away or pushing it down and you're keeping it here.
right.
So,
So, two things have come up for me as you say that. The idea of being triggered, right? And being triggered and of course, we rather experience a glimmer than a trigger, obviously. A glimmer, if anyone's unfamiliar, being that like something happens and it is almost like deja vu reminiscent of something that brings you joy and happiness and like trigger being something happens and we go into a space that maybe we recognize from trauma or something that has been painful for us in the moment. And even like, I think personally, instead of if I'm triggered, I don't reach for a glimmer. When I'm triggered, my entire being wants to take action. I want to do something now to bounce out of it and go away from it, right? And that is like the immediate response. And I think that for myself personally, I found that when I am triggered, um, instead of immediately taking action and feeling like I need to fix this right now or I need to feel this right now, it's like, okay, something is here. I don't have to define what else it is, but I can also now, again, easier said than done. It takes some practice to notice when your triggers are happening and to pause, to really pause and be like, something's here. Rationally, I like know that this isn't the right place to put it. So what do I do instead? Right. And so that's some of the personal work that goes into being with your negative emotions is figuring out, okay, how do you want to handle the situation when you are triggered? Because knowing how you want to make a decision, obviously when you're not triggered, like let's do the forethought of this a little bit and process it with a coach, with a friend, to be able to be like, when I'm triggered, I want to do this instead of this, which I always do and it has not produced good results. Um, is to kind of pause and be like, okay, it's not that I want to set this aside. Maybe in this moment, I want to communicate that I'm triggered and say, like, I just need to stop this conversation here and go do that. Or just, like, you got to figure out what it is for yourself and whatever situation it tends to come up for you because it's going to be different for everyone. We're not all experiencing the same thing, like, across the board, that I can say what works for me works for you or anyone else. Um, so that's on being triggered, and I think that's such a good point because that's usually when those negative emotions come up for us so unexpectedly. We're like taken aback by them. It's not like a slow progression into this like deep depression, which can be another part of negative emotions. And then also what came up for me as you're talking about being with your um, negative negative emotions and also suppressing them is when you said they never go away and they build pressure. And it's that like balloon fart kind of thing that we always talk about. Like it's gonna come out somewhere. So knowing that, how do you want to handle that instead and redirect it to a more productive place for you?
Right. I want to speak to one of the ones that is so prevalent and what we push away so much because it's not societally acceptable, and that's rage.
Mhm,
And rage is one of those constricting emotions where we have a boundary and it's stepped over, or it's pushed against, or it's ignored, and it gets stepped over or pushed against. Now, these are personal boundaries. And all of a sudden, we start feeling invisible because it may be stepped on again and again and again. And we're feeling like, do you think that I'm not here? Do you not see me? And that
mhm,
feeling of invisibility, exactly what you're talking about, is like that beach ball underneath the water that's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we're trying to hold it down, right? I'm trying to keep my composure and trying to be, what's acceptable out there, but it's getting bigger and bigger, and I'm pushing it down, and I'm using all this force until at some point it's so much that I
mhm,
cannot hold it down under the water. And when a beach ball is held down, once you let go of it, it's like a bullet, like
mhm,
shooting out it uh, of a gun. It's that pressure, and that's exactly what you're talking about. And so when we're not acknowledging, not allowing, when we first notice, because that's what emotions are, they're taps on the shoulder, starts with a tap, and it gets louder and louder until we pay attention, because it's trying to tell us something's happened that needs your
mhm,
attention. And if I'm feeling invisible, it's okay to say, hold on, I don't think you heard me, or I'm not feeling heard, or I'm not feeling seen and gotten. And trying to negotiate and be in whatever the environment or situation is, versus like, I'll just be quiet. I'll just shut
mhm,
up. I'll be
mhm,
small. I'll be contained. Because that's the opposite of what is wanting to happen.
mhm. Yeah. As you were saying that too, the idea of just like in moments where we shrink ourselves. So when you just said all those same identifiers, I was like, yes, in moments that we feel like we are forced to shrink, because we're not allowed to feel what we feel, or we don't feel heard, seen, and gotten, we start to internalize them more and more, right? It's not just that one instance where it's like, okay, I'll just let them have it this time. Like, I'll just like be quiet and let like my boss prattle on about things that involve me that make me feel bad. That I have to then go and do work around and then continue to hold that resentment and sadness and all those emotions that come up for you. Um, I'll just remain small and I'll just do what they want. And then all of the joy and life and humanness in your work and what you uniquely bring to your role, um, start to feel like they don't matter. And then negative ego comes in and it just reminds you of that, right? Because no one is hearing you. And you're not allowing anyone to hear you, right? It's one thing to be sad that no one hears you when you vocalize. It's another thing to be sad that no one hears you when you haven't said anything. You haven't
Right.
communicated that's what's coming up for you. And I think a lot of people get stuck in that loop, right? Like, don't you see me? Can't you tell that I'm sad? It's like no one truly knows what your experience is until you tell them. And while it can be hard to do it in a softer way when you are triggered to be like, hey, just letting you know this is what's coming up for me. It is important for your well-being to communicate how you're feeling and what the impact is on you. And I guess that brings
Yes.
up like intention and impact, right? We never, no one truly, unless they do, intends to be hurtful. Um, it's not their intention when they're delivering something, when they're communicating something to you, when they're, speaking with you and whatever that exchange looks like. But the way it's being received, the impact it's having, if you're having a uncomfortable like experience because someone has impacted you negatively, but maybe they don't know, and if they don't know, they can't course correct. Okay, sometimes someone will be saying something that's very hurtful and you're like, there's no way that wasn't intended to be hurtful. That's a different kind of exchange. That's like something that takes a different recognition. And maybe at first you do want to communicate like, hey, I don't know if you realize this, but the words you used were not very kind toward me. Like I understand that your intent was this to be helpful, but your impact was that, it hurt my feelings at the very least. And it is possible to have that exchange without feeling like it has to have the rage behind it. And with
Right.
on either side, right? Because ideally the response that you get is, "Wow, I didn't realize I was doing that. I'm going to try to be better." Instead of defensiveness, it's like, "No, I didn't." This is all, if we could live in a very, very healed world where everyone sees each other, um ideally that's what would occur instead of,
Well,
defensiveness.
you made so many points. So I'm going to slow this down a
I know
bit
I went.
because there's a couple here. So one is on a cancer journey, cancer experience, whether you're the patient, the survivor, or the caregiver or thriver. Um, Oftentimes I hear, let me just speak specifically to the patient and the caregivers, that the physician or the oncologist or somebody in the medical field didn't hear me. And I feel like I was made to feel small. Maybe they were condescending, or they weren't really hearing me. I don't feel like my voice and what I'm experiencing got across. And so they start shrinking, right? Because now we're talking about authority, especially on a cancer experience. So it's authority, and it's like, okay, well, maybe I don't know. But everybody, just what you said about the impact that what you said or didn't say, or the way of being had on me, matters. And so, as that individual who is feeling that emotion, it is fair. And also, I'm going to step over that line, imperative that you let people know how, their impact on you instead of swallowing it. It is part of being clean, being healed. It's like, I want to be part of this conversation, not at the uh, mercy or just kind of like being the thing that someone's speaking at. But it's a
Mhm.
conversation, it's two ways. So being able to say, wow, you just went really fast. All that information was over my head, and I'm feeling very overwhelmed right now. For somebody who's delivering that information to go, okay, let's slow it down. What do you need? And so now there's exchange, and somebody understanding their impact, and somebody asking, the person receiving, asking for what they need and what they want. That's the world I want to live in, where
Mhm.
my emotion trigger, tap on the shoulder, said, ooh, I'm feeling something, and then being courageous and brave enough to communicate it in, maybe not, it doesn't have to be soft, but it needs to be real and true. But it also doesn't need to be mean. So it's like, how can I just communicate so that we're two people having a conversation versus, demands or arguments or being talked at?
Mhm.
That's that's where emotions really come in,
Mhm.
where it's informing you. on how to show up and how to participate, and to know that you matter and your emotions matter.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, so what's coming up for me too is like n negative emotions, these interactions we have with each other, right? Because it's rare that we're just not rare. Yes, it is rare that we're just having these emotions without any sort of like impetus, without any sort of like stimulus or something that is causing us to feel that way. And I feel like a lot of what we're saying right here is a lot about this like ideal world, right? Like ideally we'd say this and someone would answer this. And while that's like all well and good, I do know that's not necessarily the world that we live in. So feel free to pull me back if I'm going too far here, but I feel like to approach that, to start making that change, it's about continuing to communicate how we are impacted, regardless of the response we get, whether it's defensive or accepting or whatever it is. It's more important that you're heard. And that's more important work for yourself, right? Because um, it allows you to kind of release and feel like it's out there and you did what you could to um, have this understanding in this space between you and this other person, these other people, whatever that is. Um, and we have to kind of be okay with being misunderstood because it's better to have a voice than take your voice away before it even has a chance to be heard, right?
So
And I,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. And so with the negative emotions, especially, the better we can get at communicating them, and even honestly with positive emotions too, positive emotions, right? All the emotions we should be sharing
Expansive.
more expansive, transitional, like all of them, we should be able to communicate them and say, right now I'm feeling this emotion. Or like, oh wow, like I just watched like I was at the airport and I watched these people reunite and have a really big hug and it gave me a really like calm sense of like love and appreciation. Like I love to witness that. So in general, I think communicating the emotions that we have and they allow us to connect with other people. Um and just the more of a human experience, right? Because the more we communicate both, the more that we're able to have just like this fullness, right?
Yes, yes. And you're really speaking to emotional intelligence as we hold it at CJI. I mean,
Hmm.
I jumped all the way to responsibility, which is kind of the third level. There's the first
Hmm.
level, which is just literacy. It's like when that tap happens, knowing, oh, I'm having an emotion. Because it's
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
breathing. We just do it. We have emotions in every moment of the day. Do we know where are we emoting every moment of the day? Probably not. Not uh, uh, in the way that the outside world knows. But it's happening inside of us. And so being able to notice and say what it is. Okay, in this moment I am feeling well-being. Oh, now in this moment I'm feeling pessimistic. I mean, it's just being aware. So that
Hmm.
is the literacy. And then there's the agility. It's like once I know, it's like, oh, I'm feeling pessimistic. Oh, what's that feel like? It came from a word in my head, but then if I take it into my body, because that's really where the emotions live, it's like, well, what am I feeling?
Hmm.
How do I feel pessimistic? What does that feel like? And then when I jump to the level 3, it's like, oh, so what's my responsibility in this? And so I
Hmm.
think it's between recognizing that we're in an emotion and we're feeling it. So that's more the trigger, whether it's trigger happy or trigger, I guess can be triggered happy.
Yeah, it's glimmer.
Um, right, the glimmer, or it's to the more constricting emotions, or even transitional. Um, just realizing, oh yeah, here I go. Oh, that feeling in my gut. Oh, that feeling in my heart. That feeling in my shoulders. Whatever. And then going, okay, so I have it within my power to speak it, to convey it, to let somebody know what just happened made me feel this way. And even in that, just saying that could shift it. I mean,
Hmm.
that's how quick it could shift.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think largely now there's the disconnect between the literacy and the agility, right? And I think for a lot of people, for myself personally, like one of the emotions that really like clarifies what we mean by agility is like frustration. Because everyone, like, if you feel frustrated, right, that's when like that frustrated cry happens. I think you're even more frustrated because you're like, that's such a visceral, overwhelming kind of emotion. I think the agility to know how that feels in your body, because that's such a body, everything gets red feeling, is a really good way to, really good example of what we mean by agility too. Um, to like touch back to those moments, not to be like, okay, I'm going there now. Um, and yeah, I think the more that we communicate it with ourselves, take a moment to pause with ourselves, the more we can create this world that cares about how we impact each other and what comes out of it. So, my takeaway is that negative emotions are I will always air quote negative emotions because we don't like to define negative positive because they're just emotions. They're all part of the human experience and we don't all experience positivity and no negativity. Just because we coin it as negative doesn't mean it needs to be hidden and faked away. There's just so much to negative emotions. I don't even know where to go. It's just that I don't think that they should be hidden. I think that it should all be communicated and um, appreciate even just the not the confidence or the strength, the bravery it takes to be able to share your emotions. And I think that was it like 3 moments of braveness or something like that. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes, yes, yes.
And even
20
just
seconds.
20 seconds of bravery to just share how you feel can deepen relationships, and not in a way. Yeah, I'm just gonna say it deepens relationships and it gives us a leg to stand on with one another. And okay, Pesh, physically, I am a 4.2. Emotionally, I am a 4.35. Spiritually, I am a 4.3. And hope is a 4.5. And my word is bravery.
Mm, I love that word. Um, my takeaway is that the emotions that we're so afraid of are the ones that we need to make friends with because they're not here to hurt us. They're here just to inform us and to help us be more present in the moment. And my Pesh, physical, 4.25, emotional, 4.4, spirit, 4.6, hope, 4.7. And my word is magic. I think that emotions are magical.
Oh, well, thank you for tuning in with us. We'll be back next week.
And remember, you are more powerful than you realize. Bye for now.